Power to X, also known as PTX, is the next generation of sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF for short. PTX uses renewable energy to turn water and carbon dioxide into a drop-in fuel for jet engines. And importantly, it's expanding the options for how SAF can be produced to meet growing global demand. Here's how it works. Power is generated from renewable sources to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. When combined with captured carbon dioxide, this hydrogen can then be turned into a range of fuels and products. By using low-carbon renewable energy and sustainably sourced water, PTX technology has the potential to create an abundant supply of near-carbon neutral fuel to support the decarbonisation of the aviation industry. But to truly take off, the production of PTX needs full traceability back to its renewable sources. That's why certification against leading sustainability standards, like those established by the Roundtable on Sustainable Biomaterials, are vital to prove the link between PTX and dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions. As we tackle the climate crisis, the switch to SAF marks a moment in time. By investing now to expand the supply and use of PTX, we can choose to innovate aviation for good, and together, fuel a brighter future in flight. To learn more about how you can make a truly sustainable switch to SAF, visit our website.
Hello, and a warm welcome to this series of webinars, which has been designed to help you navigate the world of sustainable aviation fuel with confidence and take decisions about how you and the people you work with will tackle the challenges of sustainable decarbonization of aviation. RSB has partnered with Alaska Airlines and Microsoft to develop the resources at safnow.org to make the sustainable transformation away from fossil fuels easier to navigate. We hope to help you to get to grips with the world of sustainable aviation, to understand the sustainability risks that need to be managed, and how to divert the resources that you have to those solutions that come with positive impacts for people and planet. Whether you're working in fuel procurement, in corporate travel, or in broader sustainability efforts, we hope that this series will support you to make the switch to SAF with confidence. I'm pleased to be here with our partners to welcome you and to encourage you to make the switch to SAF now.
Hi, my name is Ryan Spies, and I'm the Managing Director of Sustainability here at Alaska Airlines. As you may know, the aviation industry is facing a major challenge: how to reduce our carbon footprint. We are proud to partner with RSB and Microsoft to develop these important resources to help educate folks on sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF. So what is SAF? SAF is the best opportunity aviation has to decarbonize. It is functionally equivalent to conventional jet fuel, and it can be used in just the same way: delivered to a fuel farm of an airport and used in aircraft we operate today. But it is made by recycling carbon material: fats, oils, agriculture waste, wood waste from a forest floor, municipal solid waste, or recaptured CO2 from the air. Because of that, and the production processes used, SAF has an 80% less life cycle emission than conventional fuel, or in some cases up to 100% less. But there are some really big challenges. One, there isn't enough of it, and two, where there is, it costs 2 to 5 times more than conventional fuel. And while this may sound dramatic, we know to overcome these challenges, we need to work together. We believe that SAF is a game changer for the aviation industry, but we also recognize there's a lot of confusion about what SAF is and how it works. We hope these webinars help to educate key stakeholders, like yourselves, on SAF, what it is, where it comes from and how, new technological advances in its production, and how a chain of custody approach can unlock supply. We hope to help raise awareness, build trust, and foster collaboration among the key folks that can make SAF a reality for the aviation industry and the planet. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy today's webinar.
My name's Julia Fiddler, and I support fuel and material decarbonisation at Microsoft. I'm delighted to be able to introduce this series of webinars that will explore the topic of sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, and how it can help us achieve our climate goals. We need to demonstrate that through partnership and collaboration, we can create innovative, credible, and transparent decarbonisation solutions for industries that are vital for our society and economy. We need to transition to a more sustainable future, and we need to do it now. In this webinar series, you'll hear from experts who'll share their insights and experiences on SAF. You'll learn about the benefits and challenges to be considered in the production and the use of SAF, and the opportunities and resources for getting involved. We hope this webinar series will help you build confidence and knowledge on SAF and encourage you to start your own SAF journey. Thank you for joining us today as we introduce this SAF Now webinar series. We hope you're as excited as we are to learn about SAF and how it can help us achieve our climate goals.
Now, this series has been developed to support organisations and individuals make the switch to truly sustainable SAF with confidence. So my name is Hannah Walker, and I'm here from the RSB, Roundtable on Sustainable Biomaterials, and we are considered the world's most rigorous and credible sustainability standard for SAF and other biomaterials. And I'm here to be your host for the series, guiding you through the most important tools and topics to support you make the switch to SAF. If you've joined us over the past couple of weeks, you will already have heard and learned a lot about what a sustainable aviation fuel is, how it's made and what it's made from, and of course, what we need to consider to ensure that not only is it bringing climate benefit, but also social and environmental benefits too. In last week's webinar, we looked into the raw materials that are vital for the production of SAF along the more traditional routes. And this week, we're going to be diving into a newer technology that uses surplus renewable energy to transform carbon and water into fuels and chemicals. And today we have three amazing speakers who are going to take you on that deep dive into Power to X. Should you have questions during the webinar, we encourage you to use the Q&A function as usual. We are going to be there in the Q&A helping to answer them as much as we can. And time permitting, we'll be aiming to put some of them to the experts at the end of the webinar. And I also encourage you to sign up for the final webinar in the series at safnow.org. We're going to be looking into the hot topic of book and claim next week and exploring how this supply chain solution is going to be a vital bridge to create scale, overcome limited local supply, and share the costs of SAF. Now, let's have a look at today's agenda. First, we're going to be hearing from Courtney Unruh, SAF and Sustainability Engagement Director at Alaska Airlines, and a key partner in developing all of these resources. Courtney will be sharing a bit about why airlines like Alaska are investing in Power to X, the potential they see in the technology, and about their partnership with 12. Speaking of, our next speaker, Andy Stevenson, is the VP of Commercial at 12, a leader in the production of fuels and chemicals through the PTX pathway. Andy is going to shepherd us on a learning journey about how PTX works, what is needed to help it reach scale, and the climate impact potential we need for urgent decarbonisation. Finally, you're going to hear from my colleague, Carolina Grassi. She's RSB's Business Development and Innovation Manager. Now, over the past several years, Carolina has led a group of RSB's members working on PTX to really understand how the technology can be used in a way that brings positive climate and environmental impacts. She's worked with this group to understand potential risks and develop a framework for addressing them, so to give assurance that qualifying Power to X fuels really are sustainable. And today she's going to be sharing those learnings with you. And now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Courtney, who's going to share a little bit about why Alaska Airlines are working with Power to X technology.
Great. Thanks, Hannah. Nice to see everybody this morning or evening, depending on where you are. As Hannah said, I'm Courtney Unruh. I'm the Sustainable Aviation Fuel and Engagement Director at Alaska Airlines. And quickly, for those that don't know a lot about Alaska, I wanted to just introduce our airline. So we are a US-based airline on the West Coast of the United States, one of the larger airlines in the US, but still a lot smaller than the Big Four, and have about 23,000 employees. We do fly outside of the States, and so you'll see we fly to a couple other countries as well. And we are growing. So we just announced that we're working to acquire Hawaiian Airlines as well, and we'll hopefully be able to fly to more places here shortly. What you don't see on this though, is a pretty important number. It's our carbon footprint. And so every year we emit around 7 million metric tons of CO2. So we have a very large carbon footprint. And since 2020, we've been working on ways to reduce that. And so in 2020, we announced a series of goals around our sustainability journey. The main one on the right side being our largest goal of reaching net zero by 2040. For many on this call, you may know that most of the airline industry is reaching to hit net zero by 2050. So this is a pretty ambitious goal. And we're excited to partner with companies like 12 and RSB and Microsoft to get there. We know we can't just announce 2040 without having interim goals as well. And so we've put a couple other goals in place to make sure that we are continuously making progress. We set a 5-part path, as many other airlines have, to focus on multiple areas of our operation and continuously measure progress to those goals. And so that's what we're measuring through 2025. And then by 2030, we want to use 10% SAF in our operation. The best way for us to reach our net zero goals is through SAF. And so airlines really don't have a lot of other opportunities to decarbonize. It's an incredibly tough industry to figure out how to electrify. And so SAF really is our best option. We're expecting the bulk of our emissions reductions to come through finding cleaner fuels to fuel the aircraft that we already own. And then I wanted to touch on how Alaska and 12 kind of started to partner. So when we were looking for ways to decarbonize our operation, we knew that SAF was going to be the biggest piece of that, and that we needed good partners along this journey to help provide SAF for us and to teach us more about the different types of SAF that were available and to ultimately partner in the production journey. And so Microsoft in, I think it was 2020 or 2021, introduced us to 12. And throughout the last few years, we've crafted a really interesting partnership with 12 and Microsoft. And we were able to announce that Alaska is going to be purchasing the first gallons from 12's first facility in Washington State. And then Microsoft will also help in that partnership to use those gallons to reduce the emissions on their business travel. So it's a really awesome partnership, and we're really lucky to be working with Andy, who will speak next, and his team on their first facility here in Washington and Moses Lake. What I didn't mention earlier is that Seattle, Washington is our main hub, and so it's really fantastic to also have their operations so close to one of our main hubs. That's a big goal for Alaska, is to build the market here on the West Coast. And so we're excited to be doing that with 12. And then last but not least, I wanted to quickly just talk about why would airlines be interested in power to liquid fuels? And I will say Alaska's purchasing SAF from all pathways, or at least looking into SAF from all pathways. And so I think Andy and others would agree we really need all SAF pathways to succeed. However, we do have really, really ambitious goals, like I said before. And so we also need pathways to succeed that kind of pack a punch, or that can reduce the most amount of emissions as possible. And power to liquid fuels is one of those pathways that we're really interested in, because it's a really sustainable option and you get a large amount of emissions reductions for a gallon or a liter of fuel. We're also interested in it because you don't have to rely on maybe a crop-based feedstock. There's sort of an unlimited amount of feedstock for this fuel. And so it's great for maybe supply chain teams that are worried about those types of risks. This theoretically has more or less an unlimited amount of feedstock. And then third, the plants themselves take up a pretty small footprint, are modular, stacked together, and I think maybe Andy will explain more of that too. But we were interested in that as well, thinking about how we have operations all up and down the West Coast, potentially in Hawaii or other areas, how it could be great to have smaller plants near some of those locations. So I hope that helps kind of give a background about why airlines are interested in this and Alaska and 12's partnership to date. And with that, I think I'll pass it over to Andy to talk us through, or back to Hannah, I think first, and then over to Andy to talk us through more about power to liquid and how it works.
Thank you so much, Courtney, and really exciting to hear about the Moses Lake partnership. And can't wait to see you receiving your first gallons in 2025. Now, let's dive a little bit deeper into what we can expect from that. And I'm going to hand over to Andy now. So Andy, over to you.
Great, thanks, Hannah, and thanks, Courtney, for that great overview of what Alaska Airlines is doing on PTX and sustainable aviation fuel. As Courtney mentioned, my name is Andy Stevenson. I lead the commercial team at 12. 12 is the carbon transformation company. So our core technology is taking CO2 and using an electrolyzer to convert that into CO, which is a key building block of many downstream chemicals, plastics, and fuels. And I'll talk mainly in this session about the applications of our technology in the sustainable aviation fuel space. I've been with 12 for about 2.5 years now. Before that, mostly worked in the battery electric vehicle space. And so, you know, the sort of theme in my career has been using electrification to decarbonize different industries. And I think the power to liquids process is just a different way, kind of a unique spin on how to do that for the aviation sector, which can't be addressed with batteries. And so it's pretty exciting for me to be working on that. Just before we dive into the specifics of the technology, I wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, the overall challenge in front of us. And you know, a few times Courtney mentioned scale and getting to scale. That's certainly one of the big things that we think about at 12 and that I think about in how we decarbonize aviation is, you know, we've got a big challenge in front of us in supplying enough fuel to meet the current and then potentially growing aviation fuel demand in the future. And so really, when we're thinking about potential solutions, we should measure ourselves against the ability for those solutions to really take up a significant or meaningful portion of this overall, you know, demand and this overall fuel consumption. So about, you know, 400 million tons of fuel per year, 120 billion gallons by 2030. You know, we're really thinking about and getting excited about technologies that can address, let's say, you know, 20% of that overall total if they were to reach a large scale. And so I think you've gone over some of this in the prior webinars, but I'll just do a quick recap as well of the you know, what we see as the 4 main pathways right now for producing sustainable aviation fuel. And so, you know, these are the ones that we really feel like need to scale up and can each take out a significant chunk of that long-term demand. And so power to liquids, alcohol to jet, sort of waste gasification and HEFA are the 4 that could really address a meaningful portion of that demand and I think all combined together, hopefully provide a comprehensive solution relying on different feedstocks that addresses a meaningful portion of global sort of aviation demand. And so really, instead of thinking about, you know, hey, we need to buy all the sustainable aviation fuel, one way to look at it would be just focusing on kind of scaling each of these pathways and kind of addressing the barriers that exist to each of them reaching a significant scale, because, you know, we are definitely going to need all of them. Power to X obviously is the one that we're focused on, and Courtney highlighted a few of the main kind of benefits of that, which I'll get into a little bit more in this presentation. Some of the advantages of the Power to X process, you know, we do use most of the pathways use the Fischer-Tropsch process in the back end, which is already an ASTM, certified pathway to producing the fuel. And so relatively easy in terms of certification and blending requirements for most of the Power-to-X pathways. For the feedstocks, it's actually, I'd say, maybe more common than people think across all of these pathways. Ultimately, the feedstock for many of them is biomass, and I'll talk a little bit about how that fits within Power-to-X, because there's a lot of discussion within Power-to-X about what type of CO2 we use, and generally we're focused on biogenic CO2, which ultimately comes from biomass that's either being fermented or combusted. And so maybe a little bit more similarity in the types of feedstocks across these processes than people typically think. Although we're certainly interested in looking at direct air capture CO2 in the longer term as well. In terms of the scalability, I think these ones can all reach some sort of baseline level of scalability, but we certainly feel like PTL or PTX is potentially the best one and the most scalable, as it really just scales based on renewable energy capacity. The more renewable energy capacity we can add, which has about 10 times the energy per unit of land use as biomass, we can generate significant amounts of additional fuel and ultimately don't have as much of a land use constraint as some of the other pathways. One of the downsides of PTX is that it is, probably the least proven as of yet, the least mature of these pathways, and so does need kind of significant investment and focus to reach the next levels of scale. Going in a little bit more to the different PTX or PTL processes, because there isn't just one process for PTL. Although I'm representing 12 on this call in our sort of CO2 electrolysis pathway, which we feel like is, one of the most competitive ones, wanted to give some overview of what we see as some of the other pathways and their pluses and minuses. And so when we think about PTL, we really think about it as a couple of different technologies and different processes that share a few things in common. The things they share in common are mainly using CO2 as the feedstock. So the carbon source in all of these fuels is coming from CO2, and generally use renewable energy to produce green hydrogen as the hydrogen feedstock for the fuel. And in general, most people think about PTL or PTX as fuels where renewable energy is the main input in terms of energy, or perhaps the only input in terms of energy. Although some of the PTL processes do require thermal inputs as well, which would typically be provided by fossil fuels. And so that's one distinction point between the different pathways, is some of them can use close to 100% electricity. Some of them use a mix of sort of thermal energy inputs and electricity inputs. I would say of all of these pathways, none of them are really well scaled up yet, but we sort of see that the CO2 electrolysis, reverse water gas shift, and methanol to jet are perhaps the most advanced of the three or of the four pathways. And when we talk to kind of independent project developers in the market, those three are sort of the ones that most people focus on as the most promising. So I'll go through each of them and talk a little bit about the differences. So in starting with reverse water gas shift process, the main distinctions here are things to mention. So reverse water gas shift, it's probably the most well commercialized of these processes, or most well established. It still has not really reached a very large scale, but has had a lot of focus because the sort of reverse reaction, the water gas shift, is very common in industry. Some of the features of this is it is probably the most hydrogen intensive of these processes. So in a world where hydrogen costs are a concern, could be challenging compared to other processes that use renewable energy directly to drive a reaction rather than using hydrogen. And it also generally needs higher temperatures or thermal inputs, which would typically be provided by fossil fuels. And so, perhaps a little harder to reach the very, very low carbon intensity scores that some producers or consumers of fuel are targeting. And so kind of some pluses and minuses of that reverse water gas shift process. The second one I'll talk about is the methanol to jet process, which uses methanol as kind of the intermediate feedstock. Some of the features of this process, it has one of the highest CO2 inputs per ton of SAF or per gallon of SAF. And so creates some cost challenges and feedstock challenges there. But we also see methanol emerging as kind of a key intermediate in other sectors, such as shipping. And so if that really takes off and methanol becomes kind of a much more widely traded commodity, or green methanol, I should say, this pathway could see some tailwinds from that. Of course, the next one is CO2 electrolysis. So that's the process that 12 is developing, and also a few other companies in the space of developing CO2 electrolyzers. And it's the electrochemical reduction of CO2 combined with hydrogen from water electrolysis and FT pathway. It is less hydrogen intensive compared to reverse water gas shift because it doesn't use hydrogen to drive that CO2 reduction reaction, but it does use electricity. And so if you look at all of the different pathways, it's probably the most electricity intensive of the different pathways, which if you're using renewable energy and have low cost renewable energy isn't necessarily a problem. But in a world where there's a competitive market for renewable energy, that does create some challenges. But because we use renewable energy, it also has one of the lowest carbon intensity score potential of any of these pathways. That's why one of the big reasons we're very excited about it. The final one is using a solid oxide electrolyzer cell, and this is sometimes what I would say is called co-electrolysis, where you're producing syngas directly from an electrolyzer and using it at a higher temperature. So you're producing both hydrogen and CO from the same electrolyzer and then feeding that through an FT process. And so that is a little bit further behind from what we've seen in the market in terms of commercialization. It also uses heat typically, so uses higher temperatures, which could hurt the carbon intensity score. But another kind of potential pathway that people are working on to make syngas from CO2 and water. And so that's a little bit of an overview of the 4 different kind of core pathways for making sustainable aviation fuel from PTL. Happy to answer more questions about those in the Q&A, but next I'll go into what some of the big challenges are for scaling PTL. The first one I'll talk about is the feedstock, which is waste carbon dioxide, or what we refer to as waste carbon dioxide. There's some really exciting things about the feedstock. If we just look at biogenic CO2, which is CO2 that's ultimately derived from biomass, there's enough biogenic CO2 in North America and Europe alone to produce about almost 40 billion gallons per year of sustainable aviation fuel. And so, all of this biogenic CO2, or almost all of it, is currently being just vented to the atmosphere and not used for anything else. And so, we see definitely some low-hanging fruit in getting to a large scale of this industry just based on the available feedstock. And this is only biogenic CO2, not considering any potential opportunities for using more sort of fossil fuel derived CO2 to make PTL. One of the big challenges here is a lot of it, particularly in Europe, but also in the US, a lot of it is in relatively low concentration CO2 sources, such as pulp and paper facilities, biomass combustion facilities, waste to energy, where, at least from what we've seen in the market, the cost of capture and cleanup is not currently economical or not quite where it needs to be used as a sort of core feedstock for PTL processes. And so I think that's one of the key things that needs to be improved and focused on in terms of tech development, is that kind of relatively low concentration carbon capture from biomass combustion to unlock a lot more of this feedstock. Some of the big decisions on the feedstock side are about, the type of CO2, whether we're using biogenic or non-biogenic CO2, and whether, direct air capture is really going to be a meaningful piece of this picture. In general, at 12, we're mainly focused on biogenic CO2, except for a few sectors where the non-biogenic CO2 is very low cost of capture, such as ammonia in particular is one that we're focused on sourcing from, because you have a low cost feedstock that is, available with a relatively low, investment in the capture and cleanup technology. In terms of direct air capture, it's something that we are extremely excited about because it really would unlock a lot of locations that don't have an immediate supply of CO2. But at least from what we've seen, it's not currently economical for PTL fuel production. And we're probably looking at maybe a 10-year time horizon for when it really starts to get interesting as a feedstock for PTL fuels. And so from our perspective, we're really focused on these kind of core biogenic feedstocks for producing PTL fuels. One of the challenges, and this is sort of something that Carolina might get into when she talks about the environmental challenges with PTL, is there is a competition for these feedstocks. We often refer to them as waste, but biogenic CO2 is becoming more of a commodity that is also of interest to carbon removal industry. And we saw Microsoft doing an agreement and doing a few agreements for kind of carbon removal from biomass power plants. And so, it's definitely some competition here for these feedstocks. Just to talk a little bit about the renewable energy piece, which I would say is probably even more of a constraint than the CO2. There is a significant amount of CO2 available in the market, especially for the early days. Kind of the way we look at the market, there is enough renewable power being added in Europe and North America to add about 6 billion gallons per year of e-fuel capacity, or maybe about 25 billion gallons of e-fuel capacity per year if you look at global renewable energy additions. And I guess from my perspective, this is, in some ways, it seems like a lot. For our early projects that are only using tens or hundreds of megawatts of power, we feel like there's more than enough new capacity being added to get those early projects online. But if we really want to look at it in terms of what's needed to reach scale, to sort of produce tens of billions of gallons of jet fuel per year, as an industry, we'll really need to think about capturing like a fairly meaningful portion of this new renewable energy generation that's being added. Somewhere in the sort of like 5% range is sort of the number I think about. And I think that's going to be a big challenge if we really want to scale up this pathway. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about some of the, kind of the long-term kind of overall challenges of this sector. I think one of the things I think about a lot is just that a lot of the key building blocks that are needed for PTL are also really critical to other aspects of the energy transition. We really need carbon capture technology to be cost effective and efficient if we're going to store a lot of CO2 underground, which is really a core assumption in a lot of other industries in decarbonizing. We really need sort of green hydrogen, not just for making sustainable aviation fuel, but also for decarbonizing the chemical sector. Of course, we need renewable energy for many areas of decarbonization. We need biomass feedstocks for our biogenic CO2, but also many other areas of the energy transition. And so I guess this is kind of an interesting way to look at it. And sometimes, how we think about it is PTL is really kind of putting together a lot of these innovations that are critical for other parts of the energy transition and using them to make sustainable aviation fuel. And so if our success is taking longer than we need to, or if some of these technologies aren't progressing, it's really not just an issue for us, it's an issue for a lot of other sectors that are relying on these same or similar technologies to decarbonize their operations. And so just a kind of point to leave you with that PTL or PTX is really kind of a, that's one of the reasons I find it so interesting and exciting. It is at a lot of these intersections of the energy transition. And with that, I'm happy to take questions after Carolina's presentation, but I will hand it back to Hannah.
Thank you so much, Andy. That was a really detailed overview of the different PTX processes and their readiness and risks. I've never seen it presented so thoroughly. So thank you so much. And we have had some questions, so hopefully we'll have some time at the end to get into a few of them. And just a reminder, if you do have questions during the webinar, to use the Q&A. And with that, I am going to hand over to Carolina Grassi, RSV's Business Development and Innovations Manager, to dive deeper on the sustainability topics.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, so thank you, Hannah, and congratulations to Courtney and for the amazing presentations, and good day, everyone. So from presentations of Courtney and Andy, I think you can already see the huge potential of the Power-to-X technology in contributing with the emissions reductions of the aviation sector, and of course for other sectors. And for me, the Power-to-X technology is a disruptive innovation that can create markets, new opportunities, and a value network, especially because it mimics one of the most efficient natural processes in the planet to capture and transform energy, that is the photosynthesis. So I think it's incredible. And that is why I like to say that Power-to-X is a 4G technology. So, I mean, we can define this technology using 4 different Ds. The first one is D for decarbonization, due to the potential of this technology to capture and use CO2 from atmosphere and waste gas. The second D is the density, because it could be used to produce high energy density molecules such as SAF. And the third one is disruptive, because we'll be able to produce hydrocarbons in any part of the world. So we do have CO2 available in all the world, and hydrogen can also be produced from water electrolysis or hydrocarbon reforming. I mean, it's not something that it's monopolized by regions or countries. And this is very important in terms of social development and regions development as well. And the fourth and the last one, it's for diversity, because we can produce different types of fuels, such as SAF, as well chemicals, using the Power-to-X technology. However, to contribute for energy transition and mitigate climate change, we need to make sure that this technology is being implemented sustainably. And how we know that it's really sustainable. So let's start revisiting the main steps of the technology. Of course, as Anne explained, it can be much more complicated, and there are more than one type of PTX technology. The fourth, the Anne hasn't explained for you before. However, in the next slides, I will discuss the technology in a simple way, just for us to consider the sustainability aspects. So we can say that the Power-to-X refers to 3 main steps: power generation, conversion, and application. In a straightforward way, again, PTX consists in the production of renewable electricity, and then the use of this electricity to produce renewable hydrogen via water electrolysis or renewable fuel reforming. And again, this is only a simple way, a simple vision of the technology to assess the sustainability risks. And renewable hydrogen can be used directly as a fuel, or to produce electricity or heat, or use it as a chemical feedstock. Or this hydrogen can react with carbon captured from biogenic or non-biogenic source, or even with nitrogen from air separation and converted catalytically to produce fuels, chemicals, fertilizers, and others. So again, this opens a world of opportunity for the production of chemicals, fuels in any part of the world to supply to any sector. But now I will stop here, and then I will start discussing with you about sustainability aspects. And what are the main questions related to sustainability aspects? So let's think about in terms of power, electricity generation. So we need to evaluate what is the source of the renewable electricity, how it's being produced, how it's being consumed, how the consumption of this electricity can affect other sectors. And thinking about water, because water will be essential to produce hydrogen. And then a lot of other questions came to my mind. So how much water is needed to produce hydrogen? Or where we'll get the water from? Or how we'll treat the water and manage the waste? And when I talk about carbon sources, what are the available carbon sources, as Anne explained? There is a huge discussion in terms of if non-biological carbon, non-biogenic carbon source will be available or not available, but it will be allowed to be used in terms of Power-to-X technology, or even how we can calculate the carbon emissions and how we can allocate carbon between products. So there are a lot of questions. And the first thing that we need to know to ensure that the PTX technology is being scaled responsibly, it's essential to have a strong sustainability framework that will describe the specific requirements related to the technology and requirements that include renewable electricity and water use, carbon source, carbon emissions. Also, we need a robust and transparent chain of custody certification and a holistic approach for sustainability that includes environmental, social, legal, management aspects, such as the RSP 12 principles and criteria that you can see here in the right side of the slides. Currently, bring the RSP experience, we work with two different approaches for our FNBOs, and I'm saying RFNBOs, that this terminology for those ones that it's not familiar, it's renewable fuels of non-biological origins. It's usually the term that we can, and your European Union use it for the products produced via Power-to-X. Or we can also send electrofuels. And you see that I put both words in my presentation. There are a little bit different, but today I think we will not enter in these definitions. And so RSP works with these regulations and in compliance with ERAD regulations, and also with an approach that it's broader and include a global scopes. So in the next slide, I will provide you a summarized view on what are the main sustainability requirements for the production of products, fuels, and chemicals from PTX technology. I will not provide the details and all the requirements, but my idea and our idea is to provide you a summarized view, an overview, or what would be the main requirements for a sustainable production of an implementation of PTX technology. So starting with renewable electricity. So renewable electricity should be used for the production of electrofuels, synthetic fuels, or RFNBOs. Again, this is the terms that we can use for the products produced via PTX technology. And when we talk about renewable electricity, it includes wind, solar, hydropower, geothermal, and in the case of RSP Global and voluntary certification, electricity produced from biomass and biogas can also be accepted in some situations. So thinking about the facility that has the electrolyzer and are using this electricity. So the facility can be connected direct to the facility and the installation producing renewable electricity, or can be connected to the grid with or without a power purchase agreements. In the event of direct connection, the renewable electricity must be additional, and the installation that are producing the electricity should come into operation not earlier than 3 years before the electrolyzer. Also, in the event that the electricity is being produced from biomass, this biomass must be certified by RSP or other equivalent. Or in the case the facility that it's running the electrolyzer and producing hydrogen or electrolyzer for CO2 electrolysis, it should be connected to the grid. It can be connected to the grid, but the grid should have received more than 90% of renewable electricity in the previous calendar year. Or the facility can use a power purchase agreement if the installation that are producing the energy and the electricity and are providing this power purchase agreement came into the operation again, not earlier than 3 years before the electrolyzer. Think about temporal correlation because it's important to consider when the electricity was produced and when the electricity will be consumed. The production of renewable electricity should occur during the same calendar months as the consumption of electricity. But again, this is something for RSP global standard, voluntary market, and it can vary from other schemes and other regulations. And lastly, one important thing is that the operator, the producer, and the facility of Power2X should demonstrate that the grid congestion is avoided. So it's very interesting in the case, for instance, of the European Union, that the operator, and even the United States, can reduce the need of redispatching, or if the electricity can be consumed during the imbalance settlement periods. So these are some of the requirements related to renewable electricity. And again, it's just a summary. It can be much more complicated in some cases. And in terms now of biogenic and non-biogenic carbon source, both can be used as feedstock, as well as carbon captured from atmosphere in the DAC or geological source. One important thing is to emphasize that fuels or biomass should not be combusted only for the specific purpose of producing CO2 or carbon monoxide. And I'd say that the two main sustainability points related to carbon source are demonstrate that of what are the origins of the carbon, if it's biogenic or non-biogenic, it's super relevant, and also prove that that carbon that came from off gases or fermentation process or was captured from atmosphere is not receiving credits or being accounted under other provisions of law. Of course, to avoid the double count. And another important point that Andy mentioned, and I also mentioned before, is if the depends of the regulation and the voluntary market, maybe the non-biogenic carbons will not be allowed to use as a source. It is still a discussion, or can be used as a source, or depends of the origin and by a determined year or date to be defined by the regulation. And also my last point related to carbon is that the capture of CO2 from atmosphere can be high energy consumption process if it's a DAC process. So it's also important to use renewable electricity in this case. Now about the water use. So water is an essential feedstock under the Power2X technology. In general, It required 9 kilograms of ultra pure water for 1 kilogram of hydrogen production, apart from the water required for the cooling system. But again, this is only a general number, depends on the PTX process. But my message here is that it's critical that the process that are using water maintain or enhance the quality and the quantity of the surface and the groundwater resource. So respecting existing water rights, local and indigenous communities, implemented a water management plan to avoid water depletion, water runoff, and contaminations. And the operation should also consider regional precipitations, volumes, water distributions, water basins. So these are one of the main water requirements. And if the water is obtained from the desalination process, it's essential that the operation implements appropriate waste management to avoid environmental contamination or any damage to human health. And in terms of GHG emissions, so it's expected that the fuels or produced via Power-to-X reduce the GHG emissions at least 70% compared to the fossil fuel. And in this case, the operator can apply the methodologies described in the regulatory market or other voluntary markets, I mean regulations or other voluntary certification schemes. But usually the emission source that should be included in the quantification are, so the production of electricity, which is zero if it's a renewable electricity from wind, solar, hydropower, or geothermal. The water capturing and process, the production of fuel, compression of the gas, transport from the production of the fuel to the fuel station or the distributor, and combustion of the fuel. And for non-biogenic carbon sources, it's also important to demonstrate that the carbon would be emitted to the atmosphere if it's not captured for the production via Power-to-X. So I think these are my main messages and my main contributions. I hope I can provide you a good overview on the sustainability aspects, and I'm available for questions and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolina, and thank you to Andy and Courtney. We have had lots of questions come in, which I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of, so I'm going to try and pick and choose some with my eyes closed a little bit. So maybe just to start with, Andy, there was a question around ASTM. So that is the standard specification for the fuels being used in jet engines. And are all of the processes that you described on your slide actually approved already for ASTM, or are there differences?
Yeah, and one of my colleagues who's on the call may correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe all of the ones that are using FT as the back end, as long as they're using a iron or cobalt catalyst, are currently ASTM approved. Methanol to jet, I think, is one that is perhaps going through the process at the moment, but I don't think it is yet fully approved, but I'm not 100% sure about that.
Thank you. And I think that you've already also sort of answered the question around specifically on methanol to jet being approved for blending, that it's probably in the process at the moment. And another question for you is around how does CO2 electrolysis compare on energy consumption to water electrolysis?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different areas of comparison. I would say, the main apples to apples one, I guess, is on efficiency, and kind of the energy efficiency compared to what's actually driving the reaction, kind of the minimum energy. And it's currently behind water electrolysis. It's not as energy efficient. which in some ways is a positive, I guess. I'll put that spin on it, because we do think if it can reach the efficiency levels of water electrolysis, which we don't think there's any sort of fundamental reason why it couldn't, the fuels will become much more cost effective.
Thanks so much, Andy. And then, maybe speaking on costs, do you foresee that the electrolyzer costs are going to come down? There's a long question on that here. I don't actually know what the BOP costs are. You can tell that I'm not working in an industrial setting. But the question is, working on an ESAF project that is well advanced, it's clear that electrolyzer costs don't seem to be coming down. Do you foresee that e-fuels will achieve cost parity with other jet fuel sources in the next 20 years? Let's focus on that end part.
Yeah, I think the answer to that part is easy, I guess. Yes, I do think certainly cost parity with other types of sustainable aviation fuel, and becoming one of the most cost competitive types of sustainable aviation fuel. In terms of cost parity with conventional fuels, we really think about it as cost parity plus a carbon price. We're not necessarily trying to reach full cost parity with conventional jet fuel, which kind of has this inherent subsidy of not having a carbon price. That's kind of our goal for where we want to get to. In terms of the electrolyzer costs, I'll just address that for a minute. It's definitely a challenge, and that's partly why I put on that last slide. These are technologies that are needed for other industries in the energy transition. We do need water electrolyzers to really scale and become sort of widely used by a lot of other industries as well, for the cost to really come down. And that's kind of a critical piece of getting to cost competitiveness. And so it's certainly one of the challenges that we're concerned about is those other industries not adopting these technologies and not sort of helping them get down the cost curve either.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, I will give you one more, and then I'll get you out of the hot seat. Is there scope, do you think, to transition some of the capacity from existing gas to liquid plants to co-produce SAF?
It's definitely something that we've looked at, and yeah, something we're interested in. There's not a huge number of them out there in the world, I guess, from what we've seen. And so they each have their own little quirks and nuances, both of kind of the ownership and the CO2 sources, the renewable energy sources. But yeah, certainly I think it's something that we're interested in and people should be taking a look at.
Thanks, Andy. So then I have a couple more questions because we have a couple more minutes, and I will pass this one over to Carolina. Can you explain how renewable energy can be additional, Carolina?
Hi, thank you, Hannah. And yes, the renewable energy will be additional if it's not clear, but if the installation that is producing renewable energy enter in operation not early than 3 years before the installation that is producing fuels via Power-to-X technology. So this is the main requirement related to additionality.
Thanks so much. And then just another question, and maybe I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit, but there was a question that came in around the monthly temporal correlation. So I think the requirement to use the renewable energy within the month, do you think that's going to remain up until 2045? That's quite a long viewpoint, but do you think that that's going to stay in place?
This is a really interesting question, because this temporal correlation and the monthly or hourly basis is a huge discussion. For now, RSB adopts the monthly basis, but it's something that we it's an ongoing discussion that we are always in discussion with the RSP members, especially the members that are involved or related to the PTX technology. So 12, it's one of the RSP members that are provide great contributions for us and participating in the discussion to understand if you should keep this or if you should transition to hourly base and considering hourly temporal correlation. But for now, what I can say that we'll keep the monthly base because it's also time consuming and has a huge cost for companies to develop this hourly base measurements.
I would say that Jacques has a lot of interesting questions. I'm sorry we didn't manage to get to all of them, but I would encourage him to come and participate at the RSP PTX platform, where a lot of these much more detailed technical questions can be discussed in over a lot more time. And I just want to wrap things up there and thank you all so much for your excellent presentations. Thank you, Courtney, so much for explaining why PTX is such an exciting opportunity for the aviation industry. To Andy for giving us such an incredibly detailed overview of really what the technology is and the various different pathways that are applicable. And then to Carolina for sharing a little bit more and quite a bit more actually about what it really means to make a PTX SAF sustainable. We're wrapping up now and we have one more webinar in this series. It is covering book and claim, which we know is super interesting for so many different people and organizations who are looking to decarbonize and are struggling to find the fuel that they need in the places that they need it. And in the volumes that they need. So really encourage you to sign up for that final webinar. You can scan the QR code. And with that, thank you to Alaska Airlines and to Microsoft for making these webinars possible. And thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Carolina, for all of your insights. And thank you to everyone who's joined us for all those questions. I'm really sorry we didn't get to them all. But yeah, please do stay in touch with us. Thank you so much.